I
Ma'am,
understand what
step out of the
happened.
vehicle now. The words cut through the humid
No,
night
Captain.
air,
You
sharp and
don't.
practiced, the kind of command that didn't expect
You are
hesitation.
ready.
Red and blue lights pulsed against the windshield, washing the inside of the car in alternating
Focus.
color, turning Ava
You wouldn't
Brooks's
believe what happened
reflection
on the
into
morning
something
shift.
fractured, half shadow,
You're
half
kidding
glow.
me.
Her
No,
hands
true
rested
story.
calmly at 10 and
Nice.
2 on the steering wheel.
You understand the
Fingers
gravity of this,
still,
don't you?
nails
I
clean,
understand the
breath steady.
accusations.
No, you understand the
Outside,
consequences.
the low hum of
This
idling
folder,
engines and the
every
faint
line.
buzz of a street lamp filled the silence
I
between
found it.
commands. Officer Ryan
was there the
Cole
whole
stood
time.
just beyond the driver's window, one hand resting on his belt, the other tapping twice against the glass, impatience leaking through the gesture. I said step out, he repeated, voice louder this time, drawing the attention of a couple standing near the corner, their heads turning in quiet curiosity. Ava didn't move right away. Not out of defiance, out of observation. Her eyes flicked once to the side mirror, catching the second patrol car angled behind her, blocking any clean exit, then forward again, where the empty stretch of road disappeared into darkness. A routine stop, on paper, but nothing about the way they stood, feet wide, shoulders tight, felt routine. Slowly, she reached for the door handle. The soft click sounded louder than it should have. The night air wrapped around her as she stepped out, the smell of asphalt and summer heat lingering even though it was past 10 p.m. Turn around, Ryan said, already moving closer. Ava complied, placing her hands lightly against the roof of the car. The metal was still warm from the day, a dull heat pressing into her palms. Somewhere behind her, another officer, Daniel Hayes, shifted his weight, the subtle scrape of his boot against pavement betraying a hesitation he hadn't voiced. License and registration, Ryan demanded. Ava's gaze lifted slightly, just enough to meet his reflection in the glass. They're in my bag, she said, her tone even, controlled, almost too calm for the situation. Ryan let out a short, humorless chuckle. Of course they are. The sarcasm hung in the air, thick and familiar. He stepped around her, opening the driver's door without waiting, the interior light snapping on and spilling across the pavement. Papers rustled. A zipper dragged. He was searching, not looking. Ava remained still, her breathing measured, eyes forward, as if she were memorizing every sound, the click of his radio, the distant bark of a dog, the faint whisper of someone lifting a phone to record. You know why we pulled you over? Ryan called out from inside the car. Ava paused for half a second. No, officer. Another chuckle, this one edged with something sharper. Yeah, that sounds about right. Daniel stepped a little closer now, his voice quieter, less certain. Ryan, he started, then stopped himself. Ava caught it, the almost question, the almost warning. Ryan ignored it. He straightened, holding her wallet between two fingers like it was evidence of something already decided. Ava Brooks, he read aloud, slow, deliberate. You from around here? Ava turned her head slightly, just enough for her voice to carry without raising it. I just got in. Ryan smirked, shaking his head. Well, welcome to the neighborhood. The words landed flat, stripped of any real welcome. The flashing lights continued their rhythm, red to blue, blue to red, painting the scene in a loop that felt endless. Ava's eyes moved once more across the street, taking in the angles, the positions, the tension in the air that no one was naming. She could feel it building, not loud, not explosive, just a quiet pressure, like a storm that hadn't decided to break yet. And still, she didn't rush, didn't argue, didn't resist. She just stood there, hands resting on the warm metal, breathing slow, watching, waiting, as if she already knew something the rest of them didn't. Ryan flipped open the wallet with a practiced motion, his thumb brushing past neatly arranged cards until he paused, eyes narrowing for just a fraction of a second before smoothing back into that same controlled confidence. The interior light from the car cast a pale glow across his face, highlighting the small shift in his expression that most people would miss, but Ava did not. She watched it in the reflection on the window, the way his jaw tightened just slightly before he masked it. You travel light, he muttered, more to himself than to her, as he scanned the contents again, slower this time. The air felt heavier now, like something unspoken had entered the space and settled between them. Daniel stepped closer, leaning just enough to glance at the identification without fully committing. Everything good? He asked quietly. Ryan did not answer right away. He closed the wallet with a soft snap, then looked up at Ava, studying her face as if trying to reconcile something that did not quite fit. "You said you just got in," he said. Ava nodded once. "Yes." Her voice remained steady, unshaken, but there was a subtle shift now, something firmer beneath the calm, like a line drawn that no one else could see yet. Ryan exhaled through his nose, then gestured vaguely toward the back of the car. "Go ahead and sit on the curb." It was not a request. Ava hesitated for the smallest moment, not out of resistance, but calculation. Then she moved, lowering herself onto the edge of the sidewalk, the rough concrete pressing through the fabric of her slacks. The streetlight above flickered once, then steadied, casting a pale circle around them. A car passed slowly in the distance, its headlights sweeping across the scene before disappearing again. Ryan paced a few steps away, pulling his radio closer to his mouth, but not speaking into it yet. He was thinking, recalibrating, trying to regain control of something that had slipped without warning. Daniel remained where he was, his eyes drifting between Ava and his partner, the tension in his posture growing more visible now. "Ryan," he said again, a little louder this time. "Maybe we should just run it through dispatch." Ryan stopped pacing but did not turn around immediately. His shoulders rose and fell once before he finally looked back. "I am handling it," he said, the words clipped, final. Ava watched them both, her gaze steady, almost patient, as if she had seen this moment play out before in a different form. Her hands rested loosely in her lap, fingers interlaced, no signs of agitation, no attempt to defend or explain beyond what was asked. The quiet stretched, filled only by the faint static from the radio clipped to Ryan's shoulder. Then, almost imperceptibly, Ava tilted her head. "You should check your radio," she said, her tone low, measured, carrying just enough weight to cut through the tension without raising her voice. Daniel's eyes flicked to his own radio instinctively. Ryan frowned. "We will decide what we need to check," he replied. But there was hesitation now, a hairline crack in his certainty. The static grew louder for a second, then settled again into a steady hum. Ava said nothing more. She simply looked at him, calm and unmoving, as the silence deepened around them, waiting for something inevitable to arrive. The static did not fade this time. It sharpened. A faint crackle turned into a voice trying to break through, clipped and distant at first, like it was pushing past layers of interference. Daniel's hand moved instinctively to his radio, fingers hovering just above it before he pressed the button. "Dispatch, go ahead," he said, his voice lower now, cautious. Ryan's head turned sharply toward him. "I said I am handling it," he snapped, but the edge in his voice no longer carried the same weight. There was something underneath it now, something uncertain, something he had not planned for. The radio responded, clearer this time. "Unit 12, confirm your location." Daniel glanced at Ryan, then answered, "We are on Maple and 7th. A pause. Not long, but long enough to stretch the air tight again. Ava did not move. She sat on the curb, shoulders relaxed, eyes steady, as if the next few seconds were already written somewhere she had read before. The streetlight above flickered once more, casting a brief shadow across her face before settling back into its steady glow. "Unit 12, the voice returned, sharper now. Be advised, Captain Ava Brooks is expected to arrive in your sector. Time of arrival was 10 minutes ago. Confirm visual." The words landed differently this time. Not loud, not dramatic, but final. Daniel froze, his grip tightening slightly around the radio. His eyes shifted, slowly, almost reluctantly, toward Ava. Ryan let out a short breath, shaking his head as if dismissing it. "That is not," he started, but the sentence did not finish. He looked at Ava again, really looked this time, not at her clothes, not at her posture, but at her face, searching for something he had overlooked. Ava met his gaze without flinching. There was no anger there, no satisfaction, just a quiet, steady presence that made the moment feel heavier than it should have. "You should confirm," she said, her voice calm, almost gentle, but there was no suggestion in it. Only certainty. Daniel swallowed, then pressed the radio again. "Dispatch, confirm identification for Captain Brooks." The response came faster now, as if it had been waiting. "Captain Ava Brooks, recently transferred, badge number 4719. Assigned to internal oversight. She should be in your immediate area." The words echoed in the space between them. Internal oversight. Not just a title. A purpose. Ryan's hand dropped slowly from his belt. The posture he had held since the beginning, rigid and controlled, began to shift, almost imperceptibly at first. The confidence that had filled the air earlier now felt misplaced, like it belonged to a different moment entirely. Ava rose from the curb in one smooth motion, brushing a faint trace of dust from her sleeve. The red and blue lights continued their rhythm, but they felt different now, less like authority and more like exposure. She stepped forward once, closing the distance just enough to stand level with them. "Officer Cole," she said, reading his name from the badge without lowering her gaze. "Officer Hayes." Daniel straightened instinctively. Ryan did not respond right away. Ava let the silence sit for a second, then added, "You stopped me for a reason." It was not a question. Ryan opened his mouth, then closed it again, the words no longer lining up the way they had before. Ava tilted her head slightly, her expression unchanged. "Go ahead," she said softly. "Explain it." And for the first time since the lights had flashed behind her car, the control in the scene had shifted completely, not with force, not with volume, but with something quieter, something undeniable, something that could not be reversed. Ryan's throat tightened, a subtle shift that only showed in the way he swallowed before speaking, his voice no longer carrying the same sharp certainty it had moments ago. "We received a report," he said finally, choosing each word carefully now, as if the sentence itself might betray him, "about a vehicle matching yours." The explanation sounded thinner as it left his mouth, stretched across a silence that did not accept it as easily as before. Ava watched him without interruption, her expression unchanged, but there was something in her stillness that made the space feel smaller, more precise, like every detail mattered now. "What report?" she asked, her tone even, not confrontational, just exact. Ryan hesitated, eyes flicking briefly toward Daniel, who stood straighter now, his earlier uncertainty replaced by a growing awareness of where they stood. "A disturbance," Ryan said, though the words seemed to settle awkwardly in the air. Ava let a second pass, then another, long enough for the weight of that answer to reveal itself. "And you confirmed that?" she asked. Ryan's jaw tightened again. "We were in the process of doing so." Ava nodded once, a small motion, almost imperceptible, but it carried a quiet acknowledgement that did not feel like agreement. The red and blue lights continued their steady rhythm, but now they reflected differently across Ryan's face, catching the edges of tension he could no longer fully hide. Daniel shifted his stance, glancing at Ava, then back at Ryan. "We did not get a plate match," he said, his voice careful, stepping into the space Ryan had left open. Ryan shot him a quick look, but it lacked the force it would have carried earlier. Ava's gaze moved to Daniel for a brief moment, not judgmental, not approving, just noticing. Then she looked back at Ryan. "So you stopped a vehicle without confirmation?" she said softly. It was not an accusation. It was a statement placed gently but firmly where it could not be ignored. Ryan exhaled, slower this time, the sound almost lost under the faint hum of the streetlight above. "We followed procedure," he said, though the words no longer landed with conviction. Ava took a small step forward, closing the gap just enough that her presence became unavoidable, not threatening, but undeniable. "Which procedure?" she asked. The question lingered, simple and precise, cutting through everything else that had been said. Ryan opened his mouth, then paused, searching for an answer that would hold. The silence stretched again, longer now, heavier. In the distance, another car passed, its tires whispering against the pavement, then fading into nothing. Ava's voice came again, steady, controlled. "You asked me to step out before identifying yourself." She did not raise her tone. She did not need to. "You searched my vehicle without explaining the cause." Each sentence was placed carefully, like markers along a path that could not be undone. "And you instructed me to sit on the curb without confirming any violation." Daniel's shoulders shifted slightly, his posture tightening as each point settled into place. Ryan looked at her, really looked now, not with authority, not with dismissal, but with something closer to realization, the kind that arrives too late to prevent what has already happened. Ava let the silence sit for one more second, then added, "Walk me through your reasoning." Her voice remained calm, but there was no space left in it for deflection. Around them, the flashing lights continued their rhythm, but the energy in the air had changed completely. The question was no longer what she had done. The question was what they had done. And for the first time, Ryan did not have an answer ready. Ryan shifted his weight, the movement small but telling, like someone trying to regain balance on ground that had already given way beneath him. His eyes dropped briefly to the pavement, then lifted again, but this time they did not carry authority. They carried calculation, the kind that comes too late. "We assess the situation based on observable factors," he said, the sentence sounding rehearsed even as he spoke it, like something pulled from memory rather than conviction. Ava did not respond immediately. She let the words sit there, thin and exposed, as the quiet around them pressed in. The faint hum of the patrol car engine filled the gap, steady and indifferent. "Observable," she repeated softly, not mocking, not challenging, just placing the word back in front of him where it could be examined. Ryan nodded once, too quickly. "Yes." Ava tilted her head slightly, her gaze steady. "Then walk me through what you observed." The request was simple, but it carried weight, forcing detail where there had only been assumption. Ryan inhaled, slower this time. "You were driving slowly," he began, his voice tightening as he tried to build something solid out of fragments. "You hesitated at the intersection." Ava listened without interrupting, her posture unchanged, her hands relaxed at her sides. Daniel glanced between them, his expression shifting with each word, as if he could hear the gaps forming in real time. "And that indicated what?" Ava asked when Ryan paused. He hesitated again, longer now. "Possible impairment," he said finally, though the word landed with less certainty than before. Ava nodded once more, acknowledging the answer without accepting it. "And did you observe any signs of impairment when you approached the vehicle?" Ryan's jaw tightened. "We were in the process of determining that." Ava's gaze did not waver. "Did you smell alcohol?" she asked. "No." "Did you observe erratic movement?" "No." "Did I fail to respond to your instructions?" Ryan's shoulders shifted slightly. "No." Each answer came quieter than the last, the structure of his reasoning unraveling piece by piece under the weight of simple questions. Ava let a brief silence settle, just long. Enough for the pattern to become undeniable. "So your decision was based on hesitation at an intersection," she said, her tone still calm, still controlled, but now carrying a quiet precision that left no room for reinterpretation. Ryan exhaled, the sound heavier this time, as if something inside him was finally giving way. Daniel looked down for a moment, then back up, his posture now fully aligned with the shift in the scene, no longer following Ryan's lead, but standing in the reality that had taken its place. Ava took a small step back, not retreating, just resetting the space between them. The flashing lights continued to reflect off the windows of nearby buildings, casting long, moving shadows across the pavement. "Procedure exists for a reason," she said, her voice softer now, but no less firm. "Not to slow you down, not to make your job harder." She paused, letting the words land. "To protect the people you stop." Ryan's eyes lowered again, this time not in calculation, but in recognition. Ava watched him for a moment longer, then shifted her attention briefly to Daniel, who met her gaze with a quiet, unspoken acknowledgement before looking back toward his partner. The air felt different now, no longer tense with confrontation, but heavy with realization, the kind that settles slowly and stays. Ava drew a measured breath, then spoke again. "Now," she said, her tone steady, composed. "Let us start again." Ryan did not speak right away. The space Ava left with those words lingered, stretching across the quiet street like something physical, something that could be felt in the air. He straightened slightly, not out of confidence, but out of instinct, like muscle memory trying to catch up with a reality that had already shifted. "All right," he said, his voice lower now, more controlled, but missing the edge it once had. "Let us start again." The sentence came out carefully, almost mirrored from hers, but it did not carry the same weight. Ava watched him for a moment, measuring not just the words, but the tone, the posture, the intention behind them. Then she gave a small nod. "Go ahead," she said. Ryan took a breath, this time deliberate, as if resetting himself from the beginning. "Good evening, ma'am," he said, the formality returning, but now it felt different, less like authority and more like correction. "I am Officer Ryan Cole. This is Officer Daniel Hayes." He gestured slightly, and Daniel stepped forward just enough to acknowledge it with a subtle nod. The introduction hung in the air, a quiet attempt to rebuild what had already been broken. Ava's expression did not change, but there was a faint shift in her posture, a recognition of the effort, not approval, not forgiveness, just acknowledgement. "Good evening, officers," she replied, her tone steady, matching the structure but not the hesitation. The exchange felt almost rehearsed, but the difference lay in what came before it, in what could not be undone. Ryan continued, slower now, choosing precision over speed. "The reason for the stop was a reported disturbance involving a vehicle similar to yours." He paused briefly, then added, "We did not confirm the match before initiating the stop." The admission sat between them, heavier than anything he had said so far. Daniel glanced at him, then at Ava, the honesty shifting the dynamic even further. Ava inclined her head slightly. "Thank you for clarifying," she said. The words were simple, but they carried more weight than a reprimand would have. Ryan exhaled quietly, as if releasing something he had been holding since the moment the lights first flashed behind her car. "At this time," he continued, "you are not being cited or detained." Ava's eyes remained on him, steady, attentive. "Understood," she said. The red and blue lights continued to pulse behind them, but now they felt less like pressure and more like background, something external rather than defining. A faint breeze moved through the street, carrying with it the distant sound of a passing car, the world continuing just beyond the edges of their moment. Ava took a step toward her vehicle, then paused, turning back slightly. "Officer Cole," she said, her voice calm, but deliberate enough to hold his attention. Ryan looked up immediately. "Yes, ma'am." The response came faster now, instinctive, but grounded in a different kind of awareness. Ava studied him for a brief second, then spoke. "The way a stop begins determines everything that follows." She did not raise her voice. She did not elaborate. She did not need to. The sentence settled into the space between them, clear and complete on its own. Ryan nodded once, slower this time, the meaning landing fully. Daniel shifted beside him, his posture now aligned not with tension, but with understanding, as if something had clicked into place that would not easily be forgotten. Ava turned back toward her car, her movements unhurried, controlled, as if the moment had already served its purpose. The door opened with a soft click, the interior light glowing briefly before she stepped inside. For a second, she paused, hands resting lightly on the wheel again. The same position as before, but everything around it had changed. Outside, the officers stood still, the flashing lights continuing their rhythm, but no longer defining the scene. And in the quiet that followed, it was not authority that lingered in the air, but something quieter, something more lasting, something that would follow them long after the lights were turned off. The engine started with a low, steady hum, vibrating gently beneath Ava's hands as she settled back into the driver's seat, the dashboard lights casting a soft glow across her face. For a moment, she did not move. Her fingers rested lightly on the steering wheel, her gaze fixed forward through the windshield, where the red and blue reflections still pulsed faintly across the glass. Outside, Ryan and Daniel stood side by side, but no longer as they had before. The distance between them felt different now, not physical, but internal, like a line had been drawn that neither of them could step back across. Ryan's arms hung at his sides, his posture no longer rigid, no longer projecting control, but something quieter, something more aware. Daniel glanced at him, then back toward Ava's car, his expression thoughtful, almost unsettled, as if he was replaying every moment in his mind, measuring it against what he now understood. Ava adjusted the rearview mirror slightly, the movement small and precise, and for a brief second, her eyes met Ryan's through the reflection. He looked away first, not sharply, not defensively, just instinctively, like the weight of that glance was more than he was prepared to hold. Ava shifted the car into drive, her foot easing onto the brake, but she did not pull away immediately. Instead, she lowered the window halfway. The soft mechanical were breaking the silence just enough to draw their attention back to her. "One more thing," she said, her voice calm, carrying clearly across the short distance without effort. Ryan straightened slightly, his focus snapping back, not out of command, but out of recognition. "Yes, ma'am," he replied, the words coming without hesitation now. Ava's gaze moved between them, steady, measured. "You were right about one thing," she said. Ryan's brow furrowed slightly, confusion flickering across his face. Ava continued, her tone unchanged. This was not routine. The sentence settled slowly, its meaning unfolding in the silence that followed. Daniel shifted his weight, his eyes lowering briefly as if the truth of it landed somewhere deeper than he expected. Ryan held her gaze this time, but there was no resistance in it, only understanding, the kind that comes after the moment has already passed. Ava let the words sit for a second longer, then added, "And it should not be." She did not elaborate. She did not need to. The implication was clear, not as a warning, not as a threat, but as a standard that had already been set. Ryan nodded once, the motion deliberate, his expression tightening with something that looked less like embarrassment and more like resolve. "Understood," he said quietly. Daniel followed with a slight nod of his own, his posture now fully aligned with the shift in tone, in expectation, in everything that had just taken place. Ava raised the window with a soft press of her finger, the glass sliding up smoothly, separating her from the outside world again, but not erasing what had just happened. She released the brake, the car rolling forward slowly at first, then gaining steady momentum as it moved down the empty stretch of road. The flashing lights behind her began to fade in the rearview mirror, shrinking into distant points of color before disappearing entirely. Inside the car, the air felt still, quiet, but not heavy. Ava's hands remained steady on the wheel, her posture unchanged, her breathing even, as if the moment had passed exactly as it was meant to. Behind her, Ryan and Daniel remained standing for a few seconds longer than necessary, neither of them speaking, neither of them moving, as the absence of the car left a silence that felt different from before. Not empty, not unresolved, just quiet. And in that quiet, something had shifted, not loudly, not visibly, but in a way that would follow them long after the night ended, long after the lights were turned off, long after the routine they once relied on no longer felt the same. The road ahead stretched out in long, quiet lines beneath the dim glow of streetlights, each one passing over Ava's windshield in steady intervals, like a slow, measured pulse. The city at this hour felt different, not asleep, but subdued, its noise softened into distant hums and occasional flickers of movement at the edges of vision. Ava drove at a consistent 35 miles per hour, her hands steady on the wheel, her posture composed, but her mind was not empty. It moved carefully, deliberately, revisiting each moment that had just unfolded, not with emotion, but with clarity. The way Ryan had approached the car, the tone in his voice, the assumptions that came before the questions. The way Daniel had hesitated, just slightly, like something in him had recognized the imbalance before it was spoken aloud. Ava's eyes shifted briefly to the rearview mirror, though the flashing lights were long gone now, replaced by the soft darkness of an open road. Still, the reflection held something else, something less visible but more persistent. Patterns, habits, decisions made in seconds that carried consequences far beyond them. She exhaled slowly, her breath steady, controlled, then reached toward the center console, pressing a single button. The dashboard display shifted, a small recording icon glowing softly in the corner of the screen. It had been active the entire time. Not hidden, not secret, just present. Ava did not look at it for long. She did not need to. She already knew what it contained. Ahead, a traffic light turned yellow, then red, and she eased the car to a smooth stop, the tires rolling gently over the painted line. The intersection was empty, for directions stretching out with no movement, no witnesses, just the quiet rhythm of the signal changing above her. For a moment, everything was still. Ava rested her fingers lightly against the steering wheel, feeling the faint vibration of the engine beneath her palms. Then, almost absent-mindedly, she reached into the passenger seat and picked up a thin folder, its edges worn just enough to suggest it had been handled more than once. She opened it briefly, her eyes scanning the top page, not reading, just confirming. Names, dates, notes written in precise, controlled handwriting. The folder closed again with a soft tap. The light turned green. Ava pressed the accelerator, the car moving forward smoothly, merging back into the quiet flow of the city. A few blocks later, The outline of the precinct building came into view, its structure solid and familiar, the American flag hanging still above the entrance, barely moving in the night air. The parking lot was half full, a few patrol cars lined up in neat rows, their engines off, their lights dark. Ava pulled into a space near the front, the tires crunching softly over loose gravel before settling. The engine cut off, and for a brief moment, there was complete silence. No hum, no movement, just stillness. Ava sat there for a second longer, her hands resting on the wheel, her gaze fixed ahead at the building she was about to walk into, a place that operated on routine, on hierarchy, on trust that was supposed to be earned and maintained. She picked up the folder again, holding it loosely in one hand, then reached for the door handle. The cool night air met her as she stepped out, the faint scent of concrete and metal lingering around the lot. Her shoes made a soft, steady sound against the pavement as she walked toward the entrance, each step measured, unhurried. Inside, the lights would be bright. Voices would be low but constant. Reports would be filed, shifts would be changed, and somewhere in that system, tonight would either become just another unnoticed moment or the beginning of something that could not be ignored. Ava did not rush. She did not hesitate. She simply walked forward, the folder in her hand, the quiet of the night still clinging to her, as if it had something left to say. The glass doors opened with a soft mechanical hum, and the bright fluorescent lights of the precinct spilled out onto the dark parking lot, washing over Ava as she stepped inside. The shift in atmosphere was immediate. The quiet of the night outside gave way to the low, constant rhythm of the station, phones ringing in short bursts, keyboards tapping, voices overlapping in controlled urgency. A television mounted high in the corner played muted footage, captions scrolling across the bottom, unnoticed by most of the room. Ava paused just past the entrance, not to hesitate, but to observe. Officers moved through the space with practiced familiarity, some leaning over desks, others standing in small clusters, exchanging quick updates before heading back out. The smell of coffee lingered in the air, mixed with paper and polished floors, a scent that belonged to long hours and routine repetition. A few heads turned as she entered, not dramatically, not all at once, but gradually, like recognition spreading in quiet waves. Her presence did not go unnoticed. Ava walked forward, her steps measured, the folder still in her hand, its edges catching the light as she passed under the overhead fixtures. At the front desk, a young officer glanced up, his expression shifting from neutral to alert in a fraction of a second. "Good evening," he said, straightening slightly. Ava offered a small nod. "Evening." Her voice was calm, steady, carrying just enough authority to settle into the room without forcing it. The officer hesitated for a brief moment, then added, "Can I help you?" Ava met his gaze, her expression composed. "Captain Ava Brooks," she said. The words were simple, but they moved through the space differently, like a current that changed direction without warning. The officer blinked once, then stood a little straighter. "Yes, ma'am," he replied quickly. "Welcome." A few conversations nearby softened, not stopping completely, but lowering just enough to listen without appearing to. Ava continued past the desk, her eyes scanning the room, not searching, but taking in everything, the layout, the flow, the details that others moved through without thinking. At the far end of the room, a glass-walled office sat slightly elevated, its blinds half open, light spilling through in narrow lines. Ava walked toward it, her reflection briefly catching in the glass as she passed. Inside, a man in his late 50s stood behind a desk, reviewing a file, his posture relaxed but attentive, the kind that came from years of experience. He looked up as she approached, his expression shifting from focus to recognition almost instantly. "Captain Brooks," he said, stepping forward, extending his hand. Ava accepted it, her grip firm but brief. "Chief Morgan," she replied. His nod was small but respectful. "We were expecting you earlier," he said, his tone neutral, but his eyes observant, as if measuring something beyond the words. Ava held his gaze for a second, then answered, "I was delayed." She did not elaborate. She did not need to. Chief Morgan studied her for a moment longer, then gestured toward the office. "Come in." Ava stepped inside, the door closing softly behind her, muting the sounds of the station into a distant hum. The room felt quieter, more contained, but no less serious. Morgan leaned slightly against his desk, crossing his arms loosely. "First night," he said. Ava nodded once. "First night." He exhaled through his nose, a faint hint of a smile that did not fully form. "They are not going to make it easy for you," he said. Ava's expression remained steady. "They are not supposed to." The answer settled into the room, simple and direct. Morgan watched her for a second, then gave a small nod, as if something had been confirmed. Outside the glass, movement continued, officers passing by, conversations resuming, the system carrying on as it always had. But inside the office, the air felt different, like a shift had already begun, quiet, precise, and impossible to ignore. Chief Morgan remained still for a moment after her words settled, his arms still crossed, his eyes studying her not with skepticism, but with a kind of quiet calculation that came from years of watching people either rise to pressure or fold under it. Outside the glass, movement continued, but it felt distant now, like background noise that no longer carried weight inside the room. "You are not wrong," he said finally, his voice low, measured. "But there is a difference between not making it easy and making it impossible." Ava did not respond immediately. She walked a few steps further into the office, setting the folder gently on the edge of the desk, her fingers resting on it for a brief second before releasing it. "Then we should be clear about which one we are dealing with," she said. Morgan's gaze dropped briefly to the folder, then back to her. "That depends," he replied, "on how you plan to start." Ava opened the folder without rushing, the soft sound of paper shifting filling the quiet space between them. She turned it slightly, so that the top page faced him, though she did not push it forward yet. "With observation," she said. Morgan raised an eyebrow slightly. "That is a broad approach." Ava met his gaze. "It has to be." She tapped lightly on the edge of the folder, not emphasizing, just grounding the moment. "Patterns do not show themselves when you rush them." Morgan nodded once, slowly, as if the answer aligned with something he already knew but needed to hear stated. "And what have you observed so far?" he asked. Ava paused for a fraction of a second, not because she did not have an answer, but because she was choosing which part of it to say out loud. "Tonight confirmed more than it revealed," she said. Morgan's expression shifted slightly, interest sharpening. "That sounds like a problem," he said. Ava shook her head once. "It is a direction." The distinction hung in the air, subtle but important. Morgan uncrossed his arms, stepping around the desk, his posture more engaged now. "You are walking into a department that runs on habit," he said. "Good habits. Bad habits. The kind that no one questions because they have always been there." Ava listened, her expression unchanged, but her attention focused, precise. "And habits are difficult to change," Morgan added. Ava nodded. "Only if they are left unexamined." Morgan let out a quiet breath, something close to a short laugh, but without humor. "You are going to examine them." It was not a question. Ava's gaze did not waver. "That is the job." Morgan looked at her for a moment longer, then reached for the folder, flipping it open just enough to glance at the first page. His eyes moved across the lines quickly, then slowed, then stopped. The room seemed to tighten slightly around that pause. "These names," he said quietly, "they are not random." Ava did not answer right away. She let him read just long enough to understand the pattern without explaining it. Finally, she spoke. "No, they are not." Morgan closed the folder halfway, his hand still resting on it. "And tonight," he said, his voice lower now, more serious, "you ran into one of them." Ava held his gaze. "Yes." The confirmation settled into the room with more weight than anything else that had been said. Outside the glass, an officer walked past, glancing in briefly before continuing on, unaware of the shift happening inside. Morgan exhaled slowly, his eyes narrowing slightly as he processed the implication. "You did not intervene," he said. Ava shook her head once. "I observed." Morgan studied her, searching for hesitation, for doubt, for anything that suggested uncertainty. He did not find it. "And now?" he asked. Ava closed the folder gently, the soft sound marking a transition more than an ending. "Now," she said, her voice calm but firm, "we decide what that observation means." The room fell quiet. Again, but this time it was not empty. It was full of something forming, something that had been set in motion before either of them had spoken, something that was no longer theoretical, no longer distant. And in that silence, The difference between routine and accountability began to take shape. The silence in the office did not break. It deepened, settling into something deliberate, something that demanded a choice rather than a reaction. Chief Morgan's hand remained on the folder, his fingers resting along its edge as if he could feel the weight of what it contained without opening it again. He looked at Ava, not as a newcomer anymore, but as someone who had already stepped into the structure and found a fault line. "You understand what happens if you move on this," he said, his voice quieter now, stripped of formality, carrying only reality. Ava did not shift her posture. "Yes," she answered. The response came without hesitation, not because it was easy, but because it had already been decided long before she walked into this room. Morgan studied her face, searching for any sign of uncertainty, any hesitation that might suggest she had not fully measured the cost. There was none. "Internal oversight," he said, almost to himself, the words carrying a different weight now, no longer just a title, but a responsibility that had just become real in front of him. Ava stepped closer to the desk, her hand resting lightly on the folder again, grounding herself not in the paper, but in what it represented. "It only works if it is applied consistently," she said. Morgan let out a slow breath, his gaze shifting briefly toward the glass wall, where the movement of officers continued in the background, unaware of the shift happening just feet away. "They are going to push back," he said. Ava nodded once. "They should." The answer came without resistance, without defensiveness, just acknowledgement. Morgan looked back at her, a faint crease forming between his brows. "That is not how most people respond to that." Ava's expression remained steady. "Most people are not asked to hold a line that matters." The words settled into the room with quiet force, not loud, not dramatic, but undeniable. Morgan's hand lifted from the folder, and for a moment, he simply stood there, absorbing the implication of what she was saying, of what she was about to do. "What is your next step?" he asked finally. Ava turned the folder slightly, opening it just enough to reveal the top page again. "Documentation," she said. "Everything from tonight is recorded." Morgan's eyes flicked to her, sharper now. "You were recording?" Ava met his gaze. "Policy allows it." Morgan nodded slowly, the pieces aligning in his mind, not just what had happened, but how deliberately it had been handled. "And after that," he pressed. Ava closed the folder again, the soft sound marking another quiet decision. "We bring them in," she said. Morgan's expression tightened slightly. "Both of them." Ava held his gaze. "Yes." The certainty in her voice left no room for adjustment, no space for compromise. Morgan walked a few steps toward the glass, his hands resting briefly on the edge of the frame as he looked out at the floor, at the officers moving through their routines, unaware that those routines were about to be questioned. "Ryan Cole," he said quietly. 10 years on the force." He paused, then added, "Daniel Hayes. 3 years." Ava stepped up beside him, her reflection faint in the glass next to his. "Experience does not change accountability," she said. Morgan nodded once, slowly, as if acknowledging something he had always known but had not been forced to act on until now. The room fell quiet again, but this time it was not uncertain. It was resolved. Ava turned back toward the desk, picking up the folder with a smooth, controlled motion. "Call them in," she said. Morgan glanced at her, then toward the door, then back again, the decision already made before he spoke. He reached for the phone on his desk, pressing a single button. "Send officers Cole and Hayes to my office," he said, his tone returning to command, but carrying something new beneath it. He set the phone down slowly, the click echoing softly in the room. Outside, nothing had changed. Inside, everything had. Ava stood still, the folder in her hand, her posture calm, her expression composed, as if the moment unfolding was exactly where it needed to be. And in the quiet that followed, the line she spoke of was no longer abstract. It was here, drawn clearly, waiting to see who would stand on which side of it. The knock on the glass door came soft but deliberate, 2 measured taps that carried through the office just enough to signal presence without urgency. Chief Morgan glanced up first, his eyes shifting toward the door as the silhouettes of 2 figures appeared on the other side, slightly blurred by the reflection of the overhead lights. Ava did not turn immediately. She remained still for a fraction of a second, her hand resting lightly against the folder, her breathing steady, as if allowing the moment to fully arrive before acknowledging it. "Come in," Morgan said, his voice even, controlled. The door opened with a quiet click, and Ryan stepped in first, Daniel just behind him. Both of them carried themselves differently now. The confidence that had defined their posture earlier was gone, replaced by something more restrained, more aware. Ryan's shoulders were squared, but not rigid, his movements careful, as if each step was being measured against something unseen. Daniel's gaze moved briefly across the room before settling forward, his expression composed but attentive. "You called for us, sir," Ryan said, his tone formal, controlled, but lacking the edge it once held. Morgan nodded once, gesturing slightly toward the center of the room. "Stand here." They complied without hesitation, positioning themselves a few feet from the desk, the distance creating a clear line between them and Ava. For a brief moment, no one spoke. The silence was not empty. It was structured, deliberate, holding the weight of everything that had led to this point. Ava finally turned to face them, her movements smooth, unhurried. Her gaze met Ryan's first, then Daniel's, not lingering, not pressing, just acknowledging. There was no anger in her expression, no visible judgment, just clarity. "Officers," she said, her voice calm, steady, filling the space without effort. Ryan nodded slightly. "Ma'am." The word came naturally now, but it carried a different meaning than before. Ava took a step closer, not closing the entire distance, just enough to shift the dynamic, to make her presence unavoidable. "Earlier tonight," she began, her tone measured, "you conducted a traffic stop." Ryan's jaw tightened slightly, but he did not interrupt. Daniel remained still, his posture attentive. Ava continued, her voice even. "I would like you to walk me through that stop. From the moment you initiated it." The request was simple, but it left no room for omission. Ryan inhaled slowly, then began. "We observed a vehicle moving below the posted speed limit," he said, his words more careful now, more deliberate. "We considered that behavior unusual and initiated a stop to investigate." Ava listened without interruption, her gaze steady, her posture unchanged. "And after the stop?" she asked. Ryan hesitated for a brief moment, then continued. "We approached the vehicle and requested identification." Ava tilted her head slightly. "Before identifying yourselves?" Ryan's eyes flicked downward for a fraction of a second. "Yes." The admission landed quietly, but it carried weight. Ava nodded once, acknowledging the answer without reacting to it. "And what did you observe that confirmed your initial concern?" she asked. The room seemed to tighten again, not with tension, but with focus. Ryan paused longer this time. "There was no confirmation," he said finally. Daniel's gaze shifted slightly, the words settling into place with a quiet finality. Ava let a brief silence follow, allowing the statement to fully exist in the space before speaking again. "And yet the stop continued," she said. It was not a question. Ryan nodded once, slowly. Ava's eyes moved between them, her voice soft but precise. "Do you understand why that matters?" Daniel answered first this time, his voice steady but quieter than before. "Yes, ma'am." Ryan followed with a small nod. "Yes." Ava held their gaze for a moment longer, then spoke, her tone unchanged. "Good." The single word did not carry approval. It carried expectation. She stepped back slightly, creating space again, but not releasing the weight of the moment. "Because what happens next," she said, her voice calm, controlled, "depends on whether you are willing to see what actually happened." The room fell silent once more, but this time it was not uncertain. It was waiting. The silence held, steady and unbroken, as if the room itself was waiting for something to settle into place. Ava did not rush to fill it. She stood with the same calm presence she had carried from the street into this office, her gaze steady, her posture composed, allowing the weight of her last words to do the work. Ryan shifted slightly, his shoulders lowering just enough to signal something had changed, not externally, but internally, where certainty had once lived. Daniel remained still, his eyes focused forward, but there was no distance in them now, no separation between what had happened and what it meant. Ava reached down and opened the folder, the soft sound of paper moving, cutting gently through the quiet. She turned it toward them, not pushing it across the desk, just enough for the top page to be visible. "This is not about a single stop," she said, her voice even, controlled, but carrying a clarity that made every word land. Ryan's eyes dropped to the page, scanning quickly at first, then slowing as recognition settled in. Dates, notes, patterns that no longer looked isolated. Daniel leaned slightly, his gaze following the same lines, the realization unfolding in silence. Ava closed the folder again, her hand resting on top of it. It is about how decisions are made when no one is watching, she continued. Morgan remained quiet behind the desk, his presence steady, allowing the moment to belong to her. Ryan lifted his eyes, meeting Ava's gaze, and for the first time, there was no defense in it. No attempt to justify, no instinct to redirect. Only understanding, and something heavier that came with it. We did not think, he started, then stopped, the sentence falling apart before it could form. Ava did not interrupt. She did not correct him. She simply waited. Ryan exhaled slowly, the weight of the moment settling into his voice. We did not look closely enough, he said finally. Daniel nodded beside him, his voice quieter but steady. We assumed. The word lingered, simple but complete. Ava held their gaze, her expression unchanged, but there was a subtle shift in the air, something that felt less like confrontation and more like alignment. That is where it starts, she said. Not with intent. With assumption. The statement was not harsh. It was precise. Morgan stepped slightly forward, his voice entering the space again, calm but firm. And that is where it has to change. Ryan straightened, not out of formality, but out of recognition, as if the posture now came from somewhere deeper than routine. Yes, sir, he said quietly. Ava picked up the folder, closing it fully this time, the sound soft but final. She looked at both of them, her gaze steady, not lingering, not pressing, just present. There will be a report, she said. There will be review. Ryan nodded once. Daniel did the same. Neither of them looked away. Ava let a brief silence follow, then added, what happens after that depends on what you do next. The words settled, not as a warning, but as a direction. Morgan gave a small nod, as if confirming the path forward had already been set. Ava turned slightly, stepping back toward the door, her movements smooth, unhurried. She paused with her hand on the handle, not looking back immediately. The room behind her remained still, the three men standing where they were, the moment no longer uncertain, no longer waiting. Ava opened the door, the soft hum of the station returning as the sounds filtered back in. Voices, footsteps, the rhythm of a place that would continue as it always had, but not quite the same. She stepped out, the light from the hallway wrapping around her as she moved forward. Behind her, the door closed gently, sealing the conversation inside, but not ending it. And in the quiet space it left behind, something had shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but in a way that would remain, in the choices made after the lights were gone, in the moments when no one was watching, in the understanding that respect was not enforced by rank, but revealed in action. She did not change the system overnight. She changed the way it had to look at itself, and that was enough.